So how we doing, fellas? Yeah, I am alive. To be honest, I don't remember the last time I did a video on this channel, but I would like to make a comeback. This is, I know, probably my, seventh attempt or something like that. It's something ridiculous, more than I should be, but here we are trying to start again, and today I'm going to start with a ranking of John Carpenter's films. You guys who have seen my channel before know that I'm pretty much in love with doing rankings. I don't exactly know why, it's just something that I gravitate towards. So today, I'm here to rank for you all 18 John Carpenter films and hopefully get the ball rolling on this channel once again. So number 18 is pretty much universally agreed upon for people who have seen all John Carpenter's films as his last place, and that's The Ward. This isn't necessarily the worst movie I've ever seen. I'm sure other major horror directors like Wes Craven and all them have worse films than this. It's fine, it's totally watchable, but it's just basically ooh, there's a bunch of crazy people in the psych ward and chaos ensues. It's alright, but you're John Carpenter, you can do better than this. Number 17 is Ghosts of Mars. This one is pretty much universally hated, and to be totally honest, kind of like The Ward, I didn't really hate it. I think it's completely watchable. It's just kind of lame. It's a guy battling a bunch of demonic aliens or something, and it's just not the greatest. It's kind of fun. I can see people watching this as a guilty pleasure. There is, some good kills and some funny moments. There's good gore. It's not the worst ever, but it's another one of those films where if you never see it, it's not something that you regret. It's fine. Number 16 is going to be Dark Star. Now, it's not necessarily this movie's fault that it's this low, because I do like it. I mean, I think it's pretty good, especially for what John Carpenter had to work with. Basically, I'm pretty sure he pretty much funded this all himself. It's very dated, so if you watch it through the lens of modern eyes and you're not necessarily watching it because you're binging through John Carpenter's films, you're just watching it because you saw it on the TV guide or something, I feel like a lot of people aren't necessarily going to understand the appeal. But when you think about it in the context of its time and the fact that it's John Carpenter's first film, I do think that there's a lot to like here. Obviously, there's some stuff that doesn't really hold up that well, the main antagonist being a beach ball. It's not the greatest, but again, for what John Carpenter had to work with, I think he did pretty damn good.
Let there be light.
Number 15 is Escape from LA. Now, I think this movie would be a lot higher if the main complaint that everyone has is this is pretty much the time where John Carpenter tried to use all CGI instead of practical, and I think for the time, because I believe this was 1997, it really didn't look great, and it's not like it looked great for the time, because that was a big complaint of people at the time too, was this just doesn't look good, and it really doesn't hold up. The reason it's not any lower is because it does still have Kurt Russell as Snake Plissken, who is definitely one of my favorite movie characters all time, really. You'll see Escape from New York a lot higher on this list. So I do think that he does carry this movie to a level that it otherwise wouldn't be, but it's still just not great. Instead of, the big fight scene that happens in the original, there's a basketball sequence, so it's kind of just strange a little bit with some of the decisions made, but overall it's one that I would probably go back and rewatch after watching Escape from New York, but it's nowhere near the level as the original. Number 14 is going to be Prince of Darkness. Now, I know a lot of people do like this, and a lot of people have it a lot higher, but I don't know, it's just kind of strange. I get John Carpenter's concepts a lot of the time are kind of crazy, kind of overboard, but this one just didn't really land for me. There was a satanic Kool-Aid outbreak, and for me that just wasn't really the greatest concept for a film, and there's also some really weird placed humor in this. The first half of the movie, it's really serious and it's really creepy, and you have all these weird mercenaries or something outside, Alice Cooper leading this kind of gang, and there's a lot of what's going on here, what's happening, and then towards the end, after they all figure out what's going on, there's one dude is locked in the closet and he's screaming all these jokes and funny things, and it's just a really weird tonal shift. So I feel there's a part of this movie that just doesn't really know what it's trying to be. So I think there's a lot in here that could have worked, but just the overall execution just wasn't the greatest. Number 13 is going to be Memoirs of an Invisible Man. Now this is a strange one in John Carpenter's filmography because it's basically like a romance. Like there's pretty much no horror or scariness in this movie at all, except they reference The Invisible Man a little bit, the original from the 30s, with the way that he looks when he's trying to, you know, talk to people. Like he basically just looks exactly the same. But I do think that this movie is a level above the ones that I've already talked about. I do think that this movie's pretty good. There's a lot of really good effects in here, like when the building at the beginning goes invisible and they pull up to the building, like there's bits and pieces of it that you can see, and then bits and pieces that are like hollow and see-through. I think for the time it's got really good visual effects like that. And overall, the whole storyline, the romance, it's not like lame, like something that Ghosts of Mars would be. Like it's pretty good. Like I did find myself getting into this and enjoying it. So again, like I said, this is definitely a level above the rest, and I thought it was okay. Number 12 is going to be Village of the Damned. Now, I think quality-wise, this film and Memoirs of an Invisible Man are pretty much on the same level, so those two are very difficult to choose from, but I feel like this one just kind of stuck out in my mind a little bit more. Now, I feel like the people who really hate this movie maybe aren't overly familiar with the original, because I'm a big fan of the original, and I still thought that this was pretty damn good.
In my opinion, the two best parts of the original are, of course, the opening when everyone passes out after the wave goes over the town, and the ending when the guy has to visualize the brick wall to prevent all the children from breaking into his mind. And although I do still think that the brick wall scene was done better in the original, I think the part where everyone passes out at the beginning is done even better in this because it's more visceral, it shows more of the effects on more different people.
So I like this. I thought that there was a number of kind of creepy scenes, and there was some pretty good stuff in here, and to be honest, I pretty much like this just as much as I like the original. Number 11 is going to be Big Trouble in Little China. Now, this movie was... it was definitely something. This movie was pretty wild. It's got Kurt Russell as kind of a different character than he usually plays, because, you know, usually when you think of Kurt Russell, you think of his more, like, serious kind of roles where he's, like, the big, you know, main star, the big hero, but this movie, he's kind of different. He's more like a clumsy, almost side character. It's more about Dennis Dunn's character and the stuff that he's able to do to defeat the big villains. I think this movie is crazy, especially as you get towards the end and they have all those fight sequences and there's literally people like flying through the air and stuff, and like it's definitely wild and it's definitely something. But for me, it's more towards the middle of the list simply because John Carpenter has such a great filmography from here on up that really just, you know, as good of a movie as this is, we still got a long ways to go. Number 10 is going to be In the Mouth of Madness. Now, this is one of those movies that after you watch it, you just gotta kind of just sit there and think, like, what did I just watch? And, you know, what if? You know what I mean? What if everything around isn't real? What if I am living in some type of simulation? And that's really all that this movie's about. It's about this guy who realizes that the author Sutter Kane is basically like writing his own reality, and he's just a character in the fictitious novel. And it's just really wild, like the way they do it, the way that the whole thing comes full circle by the end, how everything falls into place. I just think it's such a great movie. It's so well written. It's just something completely different than anything I've ever seen, and it really is just one of those times where, you know, when you're watching the movie, it really starts to kind of mess with your mind, and I think it's really great in the way that it does that. Number 9 is going to be The Fog. Now, I feel like maybe if you're watching some other lists, maybe this would be a little bit lower, but I just really like the kind of atmosphere that this movie's able to pull off. I always remember the opening scene and how kind of eerie and creepy that is when it's the old man, you know, basically telling all these kids the old campfire story about the fog and when it rolls in and all that, and then you can kind of see over the horizon the fog coming in. Sure, maybe the old pirates aren't the greatest villains John Carpenter has ever came up with, but this movie just has this creepy, eerie vibe and atmosphere, and just uses the incoming fog itself to such an eerie degree that I feel like no other movie has really came up with. Like, obviously other movies use fog as a way to create, a creepier vibe, but this movie really centers around that, and I think that it's pretty cool and unique for doing that, and especially in the way that they do it. Number 8 is going to be Starman. Now, this movie just basically goes to show you that if John Carpenter wanted to, he could have been one of the biggest directors in all of Hollywood. If you told me that this was made by Steven Spielberg, I'd honestly probably believe you, because it's definitely his largest scale movie. It's a road trip movie, basically about... It's kind of weird when you explain it. It's an alien that comes down and kidnaps this girl and then takes the form of her dead husband, and then she ends up falling in love with him. It's kind of weird. When you stop and think about it, it's kind of weird. But I just think that the way that it's all done and, all the production value and stuff, it's probably Carpenter's, biggest movie. And, I think everything it goes for is done pretty well. I think it can be pretty funny at times, all of the humor as the alien is trying to learn how to act like a normal human and keep himself concealed and hidden. He doesn't do a great job because he's constantly twitching around and acting all weird, but basically, as strange as a concept as this is, the final result that John Carpenter gives us is a lot better than what you'd think by me just telling you the concept. Number 7 is going to be vampires. Now, I feel like the people who don't like this maybe didn't give it a fair shake, because it's definitely later in John Carpenter's career, and it definitely comes after some of his weaker films. But man, this movie is so good. This is the ultimate example of a classic John Carpenter films. You got these awesome, badass characters and, the group of vampire hunters. The vampires themselves are great. There's a lot of really good gore and kills in here. It's one of those movies that opens up with an awesome theme song, and I think it's got an awesome score too. What this movie basically boils down to is just your average classic John Carpenter film, and just saying that alone is enough to bring this up pretty high on this list. This movie is legitimately awesome, and if you haven't given it a chance, because it's definitely in the later years of Carpenter's career, I urge you to give it a shot, because this movie is legitimately great. Number 6 is going to be Christine. This is another movie that, after telling you the concept of this is literally just a car that kills people, you wouldn't think it's, the greatest of all time. But when you sit down and watch it, dude, it's awesome. This is, without question, the best killer car movie. The only thing that kind of rivals it is The Car from 1977, but even as good as that is, this movie still clears it. It's another one with an awesome score, an awesome villain. It's got a really cool character arc from the main character, Arnie Cunningham. As the movie starts, he's kind of this nervous, kind of bullied kid at school, and then he gets the car, and then the car slowly turns him evil, and him and the car side by side just basically go completely insane. It's got one of the most iconic scenes from all of John Carpenter's filmography, when Arnie and the car are in the shop and the car has completely been destroyed, and all he says is just, "Show me." And the car's lights just beam right at him, and the car just slowly starts to repair itself on its own. And it's just such a classic moment. There's so many great moments in this film. It's one of the coolest he's ever done. And he took it just because he had nothing else to do. He made one of the most classic horror movies of all time without even trying, almost. That just goes to show you how good John Carpenter is, because this movie rules. Speaking of movies that rule, number 5 is Assault on Precinct 13. This is John Carpenter's second film, and oh my god, it's so awesome, dude. I didn't know what to expect walking into this, because I had just seen Dark Star, and I was like, yeah, that was cool, but it was definitely old and dated. So I was just kind of thinking the same thing, like, is this going to be the same thing as that? And it absolutely wasn't. This movie is, it'll shock you with the stuff it does. It's unforgiving. And it's one not like Starman and Christine, where it has a weird concept. It has an awesome concept, and it's even better delivered than you expect. So basically what you have here is that there's this rundown precinct that's about to be closed, but there's a couple of people still there. There's a couple of members of the LAPD, and there's a couple of prisoners still locked up. And then all of a sudden the precinct gets raided by the South Central gang, and basically the prisoners and the cops have to team up to take out all of these people trying to break their way in and kill them. It came out only 2 years before Halloween, and it's pretty much got the same kind of vibe to it. Not in terms of its scariness, but in terms of the fact it's one of those simple movies that's just short, sweet, to the point, and it uses that to its advantage to be one of the most simple and awesome films that you'll ever see. Number 4 is going to be Escape from New York. This movie's just another one of those films that if you're an action fan and you haven't seen it, which, well, I don't know how you wouldn't have seen it if you're an action fan, but if you haven't, you absolutely need to. The movie basically takes place in a dystopian future where the United States and the Soviet Union are at war, and all of Manhattan has basically been closed off as a maximum security prison. And the president, who's played by Donald Pleasance, is basically kidnapped and moved there. So they basically have to recruit Snake Plissken, who's a former member of the Special Forces, to go in and save them by himself. And he does it. He just waltzes in this maximum security area and just takes out everyone without even really saying a word. He's just like the coolest movie character you'll ever see. And it's another one of those movies that if you haven't seen it, you absolutely need to, almost for him alone. Coming in at number 3 is going to be They Live. This has always been one of my favorite movies since the first time I watched this. Firstly, you have Roddy Piper playing the main character, and basically what happens is he discovers the fact through putting on this special pair of sunglasses that the entire world is basically ran by aliens and subliminal messages. And he teams up with Keith David, and their whole mission is just kill all of the aliens. And they're literally just walking around, I'm pretty sure it's Los Angeles, just killing everyone. Well, not everyone, killing all the aliens. And it's just like, dude, it's another one of those movies that's just like, it's just awesome. There's so many classic lines here, there's so many classic moments. Of course, this is the movie where the phrase,
I have come here to chew bubblegum and kick ass. And I'm all out of bubblegum.
Comes from. There's also the iconic street fighting scene between Roddy Piper and Keith David. Just everything about this movie rules so hard. Now these top 2 were ridiculously tough because I think that they are honestly 2 of the greatest movies ever made, and it's not even close. But for me, coming in at number 2, another awesome Kurt Russell film, The Thing. I mean, words almost can't even describe how great of a movie this is. Everything it does is executed to perfection. The gore especially, but it's not just the gore that makes this movie so great. Even though, for my money, this is the greatest use of practical effects ever. This is the movie that I'd use to argue why practical effects are always the way to go. But besides that, just everything about this movie, how all the characters interact and how suspenseful and uneasy everything gets, because you really never know who's the Thing, who's not the Thing, who's normal, who's not. And they do such a good job teasing it all the time, like, is McCready the Thing? Is he not the Thing? Who is? Who isn't? And then you get the blood test scene where everybody is found to be clean. And it's like, okay, well then that didn't work. How are we gonna find out? And then pretty much like one of the last dudes who gets the test, all of a sudden the Thing pops out and it's like, all right, well, here we go. And then everything that unfolds from there forward is just so great. And then all the way up to the ending, even the last shot of the movie, where it's again Keith David and Kurt Russell, and they're just sitting there. They don't know what's going to happen. They don't know if each other is the Thing. They don't know if they're both clean. And Keith David just says, what do we do now? And all Kurt Russell says is, why don't we just sit here a while and see what happens? And that's the movie. It pans out. It plays the theme song. It's so good. It's so great. It's one of the best movies of all time. And for me, it's number 2.
Yeah, fuck you too!
But number 1, like I said with Assault on Precinct 13, one of the greatest examples of why short, sweet, simple, and to the point can be one of the greatest ways to execute a film, it's Halloween. This movie is so simple with its premise. It's a dude who escaped an asylum and is just stalking and killing people. But it's so much more than that, because of course the main villain, Michael Myers, is one of the most iconic movie villains of all time, just because his simplicity. He walks around stalking you, pretty much moving like the wind. You never know if you saw him, if you didn't. There's so many times within the movie that you don't know if he's actually there or not. Maybe the characters are just seeing things. Maybe he is really there. The times that they see him in his shadow, and just all he is just a man in a jumpsuit and a blank white mask. But that's the thing that makes it so creepy, because it's one of those stories that can pretty much happen to anyone. You never know. Another thing is that there's not a lot of really gory kills in this movie, but that's another thing that makes it creepier, because it makes it more realistic. There's so many iconic and creepy shots in this film. Of course, one of the main ones is when the little kid Tommy looks out the window and just sees Michael Myers across the street, completely blanked out in shadow, but you can still obviously see that he's there. That's just one of the most disturbing shots in a horror movie, because just imagine, put yourself in that situation, you look out and that's all you see. It's like, Jesus Christ, like, I don't even know what I'd do in that situation. And just everything about this movie, if you've ever seen a YouTube video or anything like that talking about the horror genre, you know how into this movie people are, and there's a reason for that, because it's legitimately one of, in some people's minds, the greatest horror film ever made. And for me, it's number one. So thank you for watching this video, hopefully the first of many to come, featuring on this channel. I'm trying to make a comeback. I know that there's a lot of people who used to follow my old videos, and so I'm gonna try and make time for that, try and come back. I don't really have a schedule yet, but I'll figure that out soon enough. But until then, leave your ranking of all these films in the comments below, and hopefully I'll see you soon in the next video.